Hello everyone and welcome to the session. My name is Elhan and you are joining my session with Cloud Launch and Learn Marathon, and I'm happy to see you all attending this session. Thank you for choosing this session and being here. First of all, I would like to say as I greet everyone, I hope you are having a great day and you are enjoying all these cloud marathon sessions. And in addition to that, I would like to thank all the sponsors who made this event possible, especially the Redgate and Microsoft, the sponsors of this event. They're in a, and all this, in addition to sponsorship, I would like to give even bigger kudos to the organizer team, bringing up this event and making sure that everybody would have an opportunity to share their presentation and as well as join and learn new stuff about cloud computing and what's going on in the cloud overall. That said, I'm moving to the next slide, which is a little bit information. You will a little bit information about myself. So my name is Elhan Yusubov. You can just call me L. I'm a principal cloud solution architect for the T-Rex solutions, and I have been 14 times Microsoft MCT, so waiting to get hopefully the 15th year and continue this journey, learning, enjoying this Microsoft technologies, especially Azure Cloud, and as well as how we can implement that in enterprise, especially in healthcare domain where I have much of my experience. And I'm also contributor to different community events that you can see on the slide. But the biggest thing I would like to mention is the blog that I'm running, which is called thecloudmarathoner.com, that you can see on the screen. The whole idea is to bring the people together, a diverse group of people, to help them learn cloud technologies and make them, uh, be more confident in their next steps, conquering and learning about the cloud. You can feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and as well as on a Twitter. In addition to that, all the code and all the demos that you are going to see today are going to be in my GitHub repository, and I'm going to show that to you as well. At the end of the session, you will have QCR code to scan all the links and be prepared to have your own by Azure Bicep journey. Okay, so that said, this is the information about company T-Rex Solutions. Currently, I'm employed with. It's a mid-sized company and it's a very good place to grow your career and do interesting work. We are mainly specialized in serving our government and federal civilian agency customers, with US Census Bureau being the largest one. And in 2020, during this midst of pandemics and when the things were not going well for most, we were able to execute a US Census 2020 program by providing the census across the United States with 0 millisecond downtime. This was a great achievement on behalf of the T-Rex team members, and I'm very proud to be part of this. And T-Rex has been listed #1 in providing cloud for federal civilian agencies for the last 4 years. We wouldn't be able to do all this achievement without strong partnership with cloud solution providers, and this partnership makes our delivery of multi-cloud solutions even stronger case for our customers. If you are interested to change your work or we're looking for a more engaging opportunities to grow, then please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, and just let me know if you are there and looking for your next step and you are interested to learn and as well as practice the cloud solutioning and cloud development. All right. Next, of course, we need to look into what we will be covering in this session, and we'll have a number of things to cover. First, we'll start with looking into what is this Bicep, right? What is this Azure Bicep, and why this Bicep language is important, what it brings on the table for you. And then we'll look into how to run this Bicep, what is required, what type of environment it can run on. And then we'll look into the high-level concept that Bicep language brings. And at the end, the last demo is going to be about how we can have a continuous integration, continuous deployment with Bicep language. And there will be, a number of demos. So moving forward here, what is Bicep, right? So Bicep is domain-specific language for deploying Azure resources. And what it means the purpose of Azure Bicep is to simplify the authoring or creation of creation of Azure resource experiences with cleaner syntax and more code reuse. This is a new language, but it has a lot of common things that most of the people who did scripting or programming, they would be familiar with that. And this new language aims to make it easier to write infrastructure as code for developers and as well as DevOps engineers that typically create ARM templates targeting the Azure resources. And at the end of the day, because Azure Bicep has one-to-one compatibility with Azure ARM templates, it means that whatever you can do in ARM templates, or let's say you already invested yourself in learning about ARM templates, then you would be very comfortable with Azure with this new Bicep language, and you can simplify the way how you were managing all these templates, all this code that are deployed to your Azure digital estate, or you are planning to convert the things into a code so that you can reuse them. All right. Next, what you see here on the screen is actually a piece of comparison code where on the left side, what you see is actually a Cosmos DB provisioning. Okay, and this is the way how it's going to be done on Bicep language. And on the right side, what you see is basically the traditional JSON template, JSON ARM template, where you define everything. And they are both declarative languages, but the difference is on the left side, it is more manageable, more readable, at least from the perspective that the naming and how it is listed is very familiar to people who were dealing with some sort of a programming languages. Okay. And even if you never did any scripting or programming, it would be much easier to start with JSON. It's going to be much easier to start with the Bicep language rather than a JSON. Okay, and let's look into why Bicep language. Right on the right side, again, this diagram was about comparing how JSON looks on the right side and how Bicep language of the same resource description would look on the left side. Okay, this is the left side, and on the right side we have the JSON template. Okay, so why Bicep language? There are multiple actual advantages that we can talk about, but first one is, as you see on the screen, it's easy to understand and maintain Bicep rather than a JSON. Second, as I already kind of mentioned, that there's a day zero support for Bicep language, meaning whatever you can do in whatever you were able to do and you can do in Azure ARM templates, you can do in Bicep language. Then Bicep language is a transparent abstraction on top of a Azure ARM JSON, and you would see why it is that way. Bicep language comes with awesome tooling support in Visual Studio Code, and I will show that during the demonstration. It has clean code syntax, meaning that it's much easier to understand and there's less code to write. Code reuse and modularity is a primary reason and very important reason why you would like to switch using Bicep language going forward. It has deep integration with Azure. It has pre-flight validation, and there is no state management. Whenever you are trying to, let's say, deploy your Bicep language, then the Bicep runtime or Bicep, before executing your Bicep deployment, the Azure will check existing state of the resources, and we'll let you know. And there is already a production support for Bicep language starting from the version 0.3, which was announced, later last month on the during the Ignite event, during the Microsoft Ignite event. Okay, let's go to the next one, which is the relationship between Bicep and ARM templates. Okay, and as you remember, I said that Bicep language is actually transpiles into the Azure Resource Manager. That's why they have this one-to-one day zero compatibility. And how it happens is that you would see during this demo, but once you have your Bicep language, it has this build command which will build your ARM JSON templates if you wish one. And what it means that it will take your code, it will translate that into ARM templates, and then bring it into state that it's deployable to the Azure ecosystem, into your Azure digital estate, your Azure subscription management group or resource group, depending on the scope that you would like to deploy it. Okay, and this is the diagram that describes that. Okay, so once you know what it is and what it does, the next step is where and how I can install that. And you can actually install that on any, literally like any most used operating system in the world. And you can do that with Azure PowerShell. You can do that with Azure CLI on Windows. You can do that with Azure CLI on Linux, and as well as Mac OS, which is great. Again, like you can do that anywhere you want. I would just mention two things here. If you would like to use that with Azure CLI, you need to make sure that your version of Azure CLI is 2.20.0 or later one. And for Azure PowerShell, you need to make sure that the version that you are using is 5.6 or later one. Then you would be in good hands. Now, Bicep language concepts. These concepts are actually a familiar concept for the most people who did any type of scripting or program development during their career, or they are just learning that, because they are not that much advanced. They are actually basic building corners of, I would say, any scripting or programming language. And first of them is parameterization, right? So once we have our template, we want to reuse that, and parameterization is there to help us. Then we have variables that we can define for different things that we want to manipulate in our template. Then we have modules, and modules are the way of reusing pieces of infrastructure code in different ways within your file. Then we have loops, which, as the name refers to, you can create multiple things by iterating through certain stuff. And we have scopes. So scopes are where you want to deploy that. Are you planning to deploy this resources into a resource group, or you have a plan to deploy that into the subscription, where you are deploying all these resources packaged into the resource group, so you can get multiple resource groups. So scopes are there to define that and help you. And conditionals, is there any prerequisite before deploying your Azure Bicep language? You can define it there. All right. So that was a little bit theoretical. Let's look into some ways how these parameters, template functions, and modules are defined. So here's an example of parameterization within Azure Bicep language. And as you may see here, this is the example of parameterization when we have a storage account, and I will show that during the demo, where we are defining certain constraints, saying that if you want to have a storage name, it needs to be between 3 and 24 character longs. The maximum length and minimum length is defined here for that string. Then we may have an option that from where we want our template to choose from. This is the option for standard local redundancy service or zone redundant service for a storage account in Azure. Then template functions and variables. So what we see here is that there's a way to define a parameter and as well as variable. And when we define parameter, we can use we can use actually built-in functions that are already in use within the ARM JSON templates, like a resource group function. So you can retrieve the deployment location from the resource group. Okay, and this is a best practice to make sure that your resource group and your resources are located within the same Azure region. But is this like compulsory? No, it's not. You may have resources with different Azure regions within the resource group. And finally, the modules. And what is modules? Basically the use of existing pieces of the Bicep language code within different files in your infrastructure as a code. For example, here we have the Linux VM, okay, and this Linux VM is defined as a bicep, and it's reused within a deployment file under the resource group called compute resource group, okay, and you can see this nicely defined within this module on the right side. All right, okay, that's it. Once you have your infrastructure as a code, you know how to deploy that, and we'll do that manually. And then the next step is how I can automate that, right? Because automation is the way how we want to do that going forward. And there is a way how you can do that. This is the example from my Bicep test repo, which is also will contain all the code that you would see during the demo. And within this repo, actually, what I have GitHub workflows, and these GitHub workflows, which are defined here under the, if you click, let me show it here. So under the actions, all right, here, you would be able to see workflows that are running. So what is these workflows, right? These are the basically, at least on this example, we have two workflows here. All right, and one of the workflows is just does the continuous integration, and not the one is doing build and deployment of Bicep templates. And whenever you do any deployment or you want to check your code into GitHub, it makes sense basically to secure your subscription ID or tenant ID, anything that's basically sensitive information and you don't want to give up. For that reasons, I strongly advise, and this is one of the best practices, is to secure your pipeline and make sure that anything that you use that's like connection string, or if there's anything like passwords or subscription ID, make sure that those things are saved into your repository secrets within your GitHub. Okay, so because that's where you would want to create those secrets, and you would find a link how to do that. All right, so next is we came to the main part of the what we want to do is the demo. And first demo will create a simple demo to understand how we can create a storage account, and then we'll parameterize it. I'm switching here to a Visual Studio Code. Okay, here we are. So what you see here is that a Bicep test, and we have here sandbox. Let me make sure I can make it a little bit bigger here. So here we define our pipeline. We have samples folder, we have sandbox, and we have scripts. And within the scripts, you can find a PowerShell script, how you can actually, if you're on a Windows system, how you can deploy this Bicep by using the PowerShell, okay? And our purpose to be here is, what we are going to do is, within the sandbox, I have a couple of Bicep files already here, but I want to start from the scratch, okay? So to start from the scratch, first here, let me make it a little bigger here. What we need to do is, we need to make sure that Azure Bicep is actually installed. So if you type Azure Bicep and then version, you should get the version of Bicep that you are dealing with. That's the first step that we need to make sure it's up and running. And in this case, I'm going to run through the Azure CLI, okay? And next step, what we want to do once this there and it's running, we are going to create an empty file here. Okay, this empty file we are going to call just empty bicep. And as you see this on the screen, the extension needs to be .bicep. Okay, let me show it here. So whichever file you create, it needs to have extension .bicep. And once this empty file is created, it's here. And as you may see, there is nothing here, right? It's empty file. Now I'm going to show you how this transpilation happened, how Azure Bicep is actually going to take this and convert that into ARM JSON template. And to do that, what we need to type here is we need to come here and type Azure. So before doing that, I'll type Azure Bicep and then I will type help. And the reason why I want to do that, I want you to see all the commands that you have. And as you see here, it has a build command, it has decompile, install. So you can use all these commands. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say, okay, Azure Bicep build, because we want to build this template. And now I'm going to type again help. And this time it tells me that, yes, you can execute this. Make it a little bigger. You can execute this, but you need to provide the file name, right? There should be a way to define this file. And in our case, we know that our file is defined within this sandbox folder. So I'm going to say, okay, Azure Bicep build, and now I'm going to define the file, which is going to be the, this is the sandbox, right? And here we have empty. Right now I'm pressing enter and says, okay, I forgot the following requirement. It needs to have this, we need to define that it's a file, which is not there. So that's why what we are going to do, we are typing the same command, and this time what we want to do is we'll go in front and put that -f. So what does -f stands for? It says, okay, go and build this empty bicep.bicep file. Okay, and we know that's empty, but bicep doesn't know that. So once we press on enter, what should happen? Another file should be created in our system with .json extension. And this should be the ARM JSON representation of that bicep language, which is empty, of course. So when we click on that, you will see that, okay, here is the dummy generation of the ARM template based on our empty bicep, and it has metadata, which is pretty useful when you are dealing with, when you want to know what was the bicep version and other things that you were using when you're creating. It will tell you the schema, the versioning that you can version over time, and the functions, resources, the internal parts of any ARM JSON template. But because this one is empty, that's why there isn't too much information. Okay, that's good. So we know that it is transpiling into the ARM template. So what we are going to do next is we are going to move on and create a sample storage here. Okay, so let's click on this folder and plus sign, and this time we'll type here storage .bicep. Okay, here we go. And now we are going to use all this. We are going to use extensively the Bicep language extension on Visual Studio Code. And to show that, it's actually, you saw already the, you type Bicep, this is the Bicep extension that you need to install so that you can get a nice IntelliSense while you're building your Bicep language templates. So this is the template. I'm going back to my storage. And now, first thing we need to define the let's say this is the storage.bicep. Okay. Next, we need to define this resource. So we'll type just resource, and IntelliSense come there for our help. We'll type, okay, this is the storage, or you can say, you know, bicep storage to make it a bit different. This is the name of your resource, and then we define the resource type. In our case, this is the nice IntelliSense coming from extension. We'll type Microsoft storage, and then after that we need to make sure that we select the correct one. So here, as you see, once I choose the resource type, I'll choose the first one. You can have different versions of this API, the way how it's get deployed. I'm going to choose the latest, and then we just say equal, and then we create the object. But before creating object, as you see, you can actually create the loops, okay? And so that you can create the same logic by you can create multiple of them by iterating through the loop, okay? But I'm going to go simple here by just creating this object. Next, we need to define the name, and this is the name of the storage account in Azure. So it needs to be unique. It needs to be globally unique. So we'll put here something like Cloud Launch and Learn Marathon 2021 Storage 2. Okay, let's define it this way. It needs to be, if you remember, it needs to be less than 24 characters long and greater than 3. Then what we need to define is the location. We type location, and then in our case, it's actually we are going to parameterize all these things on next demo. But first, let's see how it works. So we define the location. It needs to be location within Azure region, and you need to make sure there's no typo there. Then we need to define the kind of the storage. In this case, it's nicely gives us IntelliSense to choose from. So we are going to choose storage v2, which is the recommended one if you are creating new storage accounts in Azure. Then SKU is the next parameter that we need to define. We'll define the tier here. And again, it gives this nice premium or standard tier to choose from. And finally, the name in terms of how we want that to be, what type of replication to be used, right? So locally redundant storage is good enough in our case, but you can choose from other options as well. So I choose that one, and that's it. We actually create our first storage account using the Azure Bicep language. And just to show that it transpiles well into our Azure ARM JSON representation, I'm going to build this bicep. So we say Azure Bicep build, and then we define this file, and this time this is the storage bicep. Press on enter, and let's see what happens here. Great, so we get our storage JSON ARM template. As you may see, it has this metadata. This is the resources API version, and this is the description on what's going to be deployed in our Azure environment. So in my case, I'm going to delete the JSON representations, and as we don't gonna need them to deploy, because Azure Bicep deployment is going to convert them into the ARM JSON templates and then make the actual deployment to the Azure. Okay, this was the first demo. We created a storage account, and I show you how to do that. So next, what we want to do here is we want to look into the second demo. Second demo is going to be about parameterizing the deployment. Okay, we'll parameterize our storage account now and make the first deployment to see how it works in real life. All right, so let's do that. So now we know that we have a storage, but it's not parameterized. We are going to create a storage with parameters now. And to create that, I already have sample here, but you just come here and say parameterized for now. And then dot bicep, okay? So what we are going to do here, we are going to take the same storage account that we had. Here it is. And then we'll parameterize that. Or we can use this storage account to parameterize. Any way would work. So let's actually use this same storage.bicep to parameterize that. That would be a bit quicker as we don't have that much time. So to parameterize that first, if you remember, I mentioned the location. So I want to make sure that location actually derives from the resource group. Okay, to do that, we need to define this parameter here. We'll call it location. Location. And for each parameter, it will ask us for any parameter, we'll get this prompt about what's the type. So in this case, it's going to be string. And we're gonna say, okay, use this resource group function and get the location out of this function. So that's it. So once we have this location as parameter, so it makes sense to just bring it here and put location here. So we did this first. Second, what you can use, you can actually use all the features that Bicep language extension provides, which is right-clicking and saying rename. And here instead of location, and we'll say Azure region, because that makes Azure region more sense than just the location. Okay, here we go. Now we have it done there nicely. Next, we want to make sure that we can have a storage name as a parameter. In this case, it's always going to create our storage name with this prefix. So we'll say, okay, let's have parameter. We'll call it storage name, as it should be, and then we define it as a string. And then we say, okay, let's have this name. And we can copy paste actually this name from here to there. There's no issue in doing that this way. And we define it as a parameter here. So what's the difference, right? So once we have these parameters and then we have this, what's the difference is that when you deploy this storage bicep, you will have an option to enter parameters. And if we change, for example, storage name parameter to be something else, it will pick that new name and deploy using that new name. So that's the beauty, of course, of parameterization. And next thing, what we want to do as parameterizing is you can define this. You remember I mentioned that minimum and maximum lengths. So this can be defined very easily by using this min and max lengths functions. So let's use them in our storage. So we'll go into our storage name and define this min max length. So minimum, it needs to be 3, and maximum, it needs to be, shouldn't be more than 24 characters. So this is how we define this parameter here, which is good. Now, next thing, what we want to do, if you would like, we can also parameterize other things, but you know, it's good to go step by step. So once we have this, what's the beauty of Azure Bicep language is that during the deployment, there are certain outputs that you would like to see, okay? For example, for any storage account, when you deploy that, and at the end of the deployment, if you want to see the storage ID, if you want to see the storage name, and as well as the blob endpoint, you know, from where you can use that in order to give that to your application to interact, you can definitely do that. And to do that, there is this output parameters where you can define, for example, you can say, okay, let me see my storage ID. It's going to be string. And now we are going to use our resource name, which is bicep storage. Here it is. And then if you press that, you will see that it comes with a variety of helpful hints. We can select ID, we can select the name, and then we can also select the properties and more things. So let's select ID in this case. And next we want to define the output blob endpoint output, blob endpoint. And to see the blob endpoint for this deployment, we are going to use the bicep storage again, and this time we'll use the properties. Okay, within the properties, it should have, as you see, a number of parameters here. Okay, and one of them is primary endpoints. That's the one that we're going to use, and we want to get blob, but there's a extension for files, queues, tables, and web. So let's choose this blob and let's save this. So we have our nicely defined storage bicep. If we go and try to build this again, this time we'll get another representation of ARM JSON, which is going to be a bit longer. As you may see here, it has parameters as they were defined. Let me put it down, and it has outputs. Okay, and this is all good, but how we can deploy that, right? How we can see that in the action? And to do that, the next step we are going to do is the deployment that using the scripts. Okay, and to do that using deployment, because let me close this and close this actually delete this JSON file, because we are not going to use that during deployment, as Azure Bicep is actually going to convert that before deploying. Okay, and now let's do the following. Now we need to see where we are going to deploy this, and to deploy this we are going to, for example, what I'm going to do here, I'm going to see what are the resource group that I currently have. So if I type AZ group and then list output table, it should give me all the list of the currently I'm actually already connect to my Azure subscription. If you wanna connect to yours, you need to type this AZ login, okay? And then it will prompt you to log in and authenticate yourself, and then you would be able to run this command of AZ group list. Okay, after that, if you run this command, then you would be able to see all the resource groups programmatically on your command line. Okay, on your command line. All right, so as you may see, we have these resource groups here. Okay, and now we are going to create a new one. To create a new one, in order to deploy our storage bicep that we just parameterized. So to do that, next step is I'm going to create a resource group. I will type AZ group create. You need to define the name, which is going to be as simple as bicep, let's say starter demo. That's going to be our, and as a location, let's choose the East US 2. That's another Azure region that you have, and let's press on enter. And I think we are going to get error because I made a typo here. Let me correct that shortly. Okay. Okay, now it's correct. Let's press on enter. Here we go. Now, if we retype this command, AZ group list, now we should see that Bicep starter demo is created. It's over here and it's waiting for us for a new deployment. So to deploy our bicep parameterized bicep, we are going to use the AZ deployment command. Okay, and what it look like, it will look like this. So here we need to define AZ deployment. Then we need to make sure it's a group deployment. And then we type create. If you want to give a name for this deployment, you can say name, okay, say parameterized storage. Let's give such a name. And then we need to define the resource group where we are going to deploy that. So we'll just type resource group. You can also type just G and make sure that you type less. But for the purpose of demo, I just want to make sure you know what it is deploying. And the resource group that we just created was called Bicep demo. I believe that was the name. Let me double check that. Okay, can you see this? Storage. Let's do the following. Spare not to guess, and make sure that you find that name correctly. AZ group list. Okay. So, okay, the name was Bicep Starter Demo. Okay, yeah, it's good that you looked. So now we are going to again type AZ deployment. Then we type the group, create, and then we type the name of the deployment. parameterized storage, and then resource group name, resource group. This is Bicep starter. It's much easier to do that on Cloud Shell because it has so now the template file name. So if you remember, we can just put -f and then put the file name. In our case, it's in sandbox, it's storage. Okay, Bicep. And next, after that, we need to define the parameter, right? If you remember, we defined the storage name parameter. Now I will say, okay, and here it is, the storage name. So we want to deploy that with the storage name. Let's define the parameter here. Okay, storage name, and let's put it at cloud. You can see actually demo cloud launch and learn marathon 2021 STG2. Okay, so this should be less than 24 but greater than 3 characters long. And then let's say we want to make a pre-flight check, as it was mentioned during presentation. You can make a pre-flight check. What it stands for, let's check with Azure. And in order to do that, we just put this -c at the end. And what it would do is basically it's going to take our template Bicep language, convert that into ARM JSON template, and check it against current connection to Azure subscription to see that if we deploy this resource, what will happen? What type of changes are going to be applied to our Azure environment? Okay, that's what we see now. It says running. And here we get the results. So what are the results saying? It says that it came back and there will be some resources created. And what is going to be created? It's we will get this new storage account created under the resource group that we defined. Okay, that's what it is. So in order to make this happen, at the end here it will ask, because we put this conditional -c, we see here there's a prompt asking us to deploy it or not. And in our case, we'll say, okay, yes, we want this to be deployed. And now actual deployment is going to kick off and we should see a storage account created. Okay, let it run. It will take a couple of seconds here. So what we expect to happen is actually we expect to see a storage account created with the parameterized name that we defined, which was, let's see here, this demo CLLM 2021 STG2. So it says it's completed. It's great. So if we go into our, let me open Azure. Here my Azure, actually, you should be able to see that. Okay, here I refresh it and we have actually 11. Now we have more resource groups from which is the Bicep starter demo. So once I navigate there, as you may see here, I have the storage account created. And if you look inside, it should have the same parameters. If you look into properties, let's look at the properties here. You will see that it's actually succeeded. It says blob service name and static name and other things. If you want to look into deployment, we can always go into the resource group. Okay. And here under resource group, we have this deployments tab. Here it is. We'll see that deployment name that we defined. Okay, here it is. So you see the name that we defined for our deployment is here. It's succeeded. We'll click on that. And now what we see is actually input and output parameters. We don't see that because I have this extension here. So you see it defines that our input parameters were these two parameters that we had, and output is going to be the storage ID, as you see here. and as well as the blob endpoint. Okay, this is the blob endpoint of our storage, which most probably you are aware about that. Okay, that's great. So we had our parameterized storage Bicep language template deployed successfully. Now, next step in our demo is going to be this next demo where we'll look into certain things, and our time is pressing here, so we need to move a little faster. So let me show. So what we did, we just looked into parameterized Bicep module, okay, where we parameterize our deployment. So next is we'll look into how we can apply certain security on that. And when we say security, what I refer to is how we can actually deploy a policy, right, which will basically do certain stuffs in a way that our environment is compliant. Like, for example, you want to make sure that if you are located in West Europe, all the resources are deployed are within the Azure region of West Europe. Okay, you don't want them to be deployed in Japan or let's say in West US regions. So in order to do that, and you want to apply these policies using the scripts, convert them into scripts, there is a way to do that easily and nicely. So let me show that to you. So to do that part, what we are going to do is you can switch into the samples folder here, as you may see, and look into custom locations. So what we see here in custom locations is the policy deployment where we are using the target scope subscription, and it is saying that allow only the location that are listed in this array. Okay, it has deny or audit, meaning if you want to deny deployments, you have the way to do that. But first, if you want to audit to see who is breaking this compliance or what's happening actually in the subscription where you want to enforce that, you can do this audit option as well. And then we define our resource group with the name of this deployment, with the metadata that needs to have, and locations. This is the, allowed locations, and it defines all the required parameters within this policy, and it applies the deny or audit during the effect of this policy. And once we have there, then we define location policy. This is the actual location policy that's using the document defined previously location policy definition. Okay, and it has this allowed location as well as effect that we defined above. Okay, all right, that's it. You can go ahead and actually deploy this, and if you want to deploy that, you can use demo script azcli that I have here. Okay, it will take a bit more time, and in order to make this custom location policy to work, you would have to wait at least around like half an hour or so, because it takes some time to that policy to take effect and being able to see the results. So all right, that's it. I'm moving a little, and we need to move a little faster due to the time constraints that we have. And where we are now is we just show this policy thing. And next demo that we have is modules and so we show the security policies. Next one is CI/CD and how we can actually use these workflow actions, and as well as see that in action, right? So to see this in action, I'm not going to waste any time here and just jump into the code. So at least here, what you see, you can go into the sandbox, and within the sandbox, you have this main bicep. So what is this main bicep? I actually configured that in a way that if there's any change into main bicep, it's going to take it and deploy it into my subscription. Okay, that's what it does. And what's inside this main bicep? Again, there's this target scope, which defines the way where you want to deploy that. If you don't define it, then Bicep language assumes that you want to deploy into the location that's going to be defined during the deployment. Next, I define certain parameters here. Then I have actually resource group. Okay, I have a resource group here. That resource group is defined as Bicep demo storage, and then we have cloud, launch and learn marathon, and then there's deployment location, which is going to be one of those East US regions or West US, depending what's chosen. Then we have the storage module. So this is the parameterized storage that I'm using. And in order to reuse that parameterized storage, as you may see, I'm actually getting that from the using the whenever you use the modules, you need to define the reference to the Bicep template from where this resource is going to be retrieved. Then define the scope where you want to deploy that. In our case, it's a resource group here. Then we have blob endpoint as an output. Then for compute resources here, as you may see, what we have compute resource group created, and within this compute resource group, we want to deploy a Windows virtual machine, okay? And it has a username, DNS label, and all locations and everything, the VM size defined here. Next, we want to deploy application in addition to that into its own resource group. And this is the name of the resource group, the third resource group that's starting with this name. This is the location that's defined within the parameters. And within this location, we want to deploy a Linux app. And Linux app is actually any web app in Azure actually comes with two resources that needs to be deployed, the web app itself and the underlying application service plan. And the web app name that we expect to have is called CLL M21. So, okay, actually, I forgot to do that, but let's do the following. Let's kick off this. Okay, I would say main bicep for demo. So I made a change here, okay, and let's add all this change into our Git repository, and then let's say git commit in demo resources. Okay, that would do. And then finally we need to say git. Let's see if everything is propagated. Yes, let's make the git push. So what should happen now once I click on git push? It's basically, of course, going to deploy this into my git repository. And now it's going to go to the main. Let me show you git status. So it's going to go to the main, and it's going to use this GitHub workflows that defined here to kick them off. So in my case, this is the sample pipeline that just does the CI part, but deploy bicep is actually the one that's more interested to look into. Here, when I open that, you see that this is the YAML file that's get connected to my Azure subscriptions, and it has two jobs here, right? So it takes the latest Ubuntu, image, and then on that environment, it's running this bicep build actions, which is going to take my bicep language, build it into JSON ARM template, and then package it and create the artifact, okay, to be able to use that artifact during the deployment. And next step is going to be the deploy resources one, which will take that artifact, bicep artifact that's created, download that, then it's going to extract that file, log in into my Azure subscription, and then it's going to be able to deploy these ARM templates because we already built that ARM template, and put them into appropriate locations. And in our case, what we should expect actually to happen, we should expect to see 3 resource group with storage, compute, which is going to be the VM here, and we should see another resource group called Bicep Demo App, Cloud Launch and the Marathon, which will have the app resources there. Okay, let's switch into our GitHub. So I switched into my GitHub now. I click on refresh here. So it says that let's look into actions. And in actions, we see spin demo resources. This is the thing that's going on now. This is the name that we put in our push request. And now what we see is actually the building is completed. Now it's deploying the resources. The second pipeline is running. If I click on build ARM, it will tell me all the steps and you can look into them. In deploy resources, it's also getting those artifacts, logging into Azure, and then started deploying. So once this deployment succeeded, we should see 3 more. Let me look here. We should see 3 more resource groups here. So currently we have 11 of them. We have Bicep starter demo that we created probably 10 or 15 minutes ago. So let's click on refresh. As you see now, I have 3 more after this Bicep starter demo. Now I have 3 more created. Okay, so is this completed or not? I don't know. You need to look here. So it looks like it's still deploying. But while it is still deploying, let's look what we have inside this. What we have inside those resources. So if I go into the compute, okay, it should show me that, hey, this is the simple demo Windows virtual machine that get deployed. If I look into the demo app, I see apps, basically service plan, application service plan, and the actual web app is here and succeeded. So if you click on web app, it's going to be, simple web app, nothing there because we didn't do any special things. So once spin up, I will show it again. It will take a little time to spin first time. So let's go back to resource group, and as a storage, if you go to the last third resource group, storage, we should see there a storage created. Here it is. Okay. And that's actually, the app is still loading. Okay, that's fine, let it load. But our purpose here was that let's go and kick the, okay, it's completed here, which is good. So what we did, basically, we kicked off our Azure workflows to make the build and then deployment of our Bicep language templates using our main.bicep file. Okay, and if I go to my code repository here and look into workflows, these are the 2 workflow files that I talked about, and the one that actually did the work is deploy Bicep. If you go there, here we go, we see the same Azure workflow and same YAML file that's actually used during this deployment. Okay. All right. That said, it's actually, let me look at the time. We are coming to the end. And here, let me recap what we actually able to see. So we saw this demo number 4 as it was promised. Then what we have covered, we looked into what is Bicep. That's great. We looked into Bicep language. We looked how to run it, the concepts, CI/CD, and demos. Finally, please take a time to take the screenshots. You see, I have here Azure Bicep demo GitHub that you can use. For learning materials, you can use these 3. You can use your QCR code to get the information about Bicep project on GitHub, the tutorial that you can get started with, and as well as how you can get started with the DevOps, meaning how you can automatically deploy them. It's all here. And, of course, you can get connected with me on LinkedIn here. Again, thank you again for attending. Thank you everyone being part of this great journey. And thank you again. Thank you very much, everybody, everyone who takes their time to attend, and thank you sponsors, and I hope to see you next time. Take care. Bye.